Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site covering your Arizona Cardinals. And with me on recording on a Tuesday night for episode number 622 is my co-host Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And the Cardinals have, all the good juju. And I'll put it this way, Seth, and being an Arizona State fan, I think the Sun Devils have officially taken all the juju from all the teams to accomplish what they've accomplished, because for a while the Cardinals and Sun Devils, it was they'd win and then the Cardinals would win. But now with the Sun Devils, making it to the college football playoff as a number 4 seed and a first round bye, it feels like they have sucked any goodness, any good juju, good vibes, fortune for both the Suns and the Cardinals as the Cardinals lose their third straight game on Sunday, fall into third place in the NFC West, and lose to the Seattle Seahawks 30-18 on Sunday. My goodness, Seth, what a turn of events, and they don't even have Cliff Kingsbury to blame for it anymore, do they?
No, and it's just unfortunate the way it's kind of fallen apart at every level. It's something that we talked about last week. The defense does some good things and then in situations falters. The offense is, struggled, stagnation most of the second half of the season.
Turnovers. It's just, what in the world? And, they're punter and then missed field goals. Rashad Ryland's missed a field goal in each of the last 3 games.
I will say this. And again, it's hard to absolve that singular one, right? Because he's, like you said, he's missed so many. But to be fair, at least this one, he had a new holder, so it was a little different, right?
No, and he didn't, though, because Gillikin held on that.
Oh, he was able to hold?
Yeah, they brought Gillikin out, which was weird because I thought that the reason why they went for 2 instead of kicking the extra point was maybe they didn't trust Gillikin with his ankle to be able to hold, but then they brought him out the field goal, and the hold seemed to be fine, and Ryland is just apparently turned into, my son Diego. I enjoy. He's now 23 years old, so it's nice to get some insight from him. But he's like, it's different than like a Matt Prater. Like when Matt Prater misses a field goal, you don't worry about it so much. But when you've got a young kicker in the NFL, and he's been on a roll, and then he misses one, they don't recover very well. It's in their head, and then they start missing more. So Ryland had that role for a while when he's hitting those clutch kicks, and then when he missed the one kick in Seattle, you're like, uh-oh. And then he missed another kick last week. And then he missed a kick again on Sunday. You're like, okay, like we were talking about Ryland as the kicker of the future. Now we're like, please, Matt Prater, come back.
Yeah, it's tough, man. And so you just look at it, and it's interesting because I think people get kind of, I don't want to say obsessed. People get kind of, they look at things very like black and white, and they're like, well, this has been bad and this has been good and blah blah blah. And you look at it, and the defense gave up 409 total yards of offense
to a team that hadn't reached 300 yards of offense in their 3-game winning streak. So that was not great.
And that's tough, man. Like, and you look at it, we've talked about it the hole that Kyler put them in with the interceptions. Okay, so it's 17-10, and then you give up a 51-yard touchdown. You're like, again, it's like, and then you get down 27-10 because you give up a field goal, and then you score, and you're like, okay, 27-18, like you said, you're at a point now where you can kick a field goal that gets you within 27-21, then you can win with a touchdown or vice versa. And then doink. And then not only doink, but then you miss the field goal. Just think about this. They missed the field goal. There's 7:16 left in the game when they missed that field goal. And the Seahawks hold the ball for 5:20. The Cardinals get the ball with under 2 minutes to go in the game, and they make a field goal. And you're just like, okay. I mean, this is again the situation where you're like, was there one particularly bad thing? Yes. But did we see anything that was overly good in this situation? And I think the answer is no. And that's the thing, is like the regression for the entire team is what's disturbing, because it just feels like, and even Nick Rallis came out and said it today, the effort level was lacking this week.
Oh, that's not good. We'll talk about both the offense and the defense, but I what's starting to get some buzz is Kyler Murray's play, and I want to talk about what he is, where he is, about the future of Kyler Murray, how he's played, because the guy had 3 interceptions in his first 10 games. He's been particularly good his entire career about taking care of the football, but in the last 3 games, 5 interceptions, all losses, and people are starting to wonder if he can be the guy, if it's time to move off of him. You and I know that Kyler has had some uneven play. He hasn't been MVP level, but we have seen ceiling. Like, we've seen that level this year where he is playing at an incredibly high level. But people seem to be getting yes, turnovers are bad. These turnovers are contributing to their losses. But we also know that not all interceptions are created equal, because there are lots of reasons why interceptions happen. One could be bad decision. One could be a misplaced throw. One could be desperation. There's sometimes mistakes by teammates. And then there's sometimes just great plays by defenders. If you were Seth, and I wrote an analysis on CardsWire on Tuesday of each of the 5 interceptions that Kyler's had over the last 3 weeks. If you were to look at the 5 interceptions over the last 3 weeks, Seth, how many of them would you consider, bad interceptions in terms of it? All of them were bad in terms of their results, but would you say were egregious?
Bad process,
bad decision making, things like that? Because that, more than anything, like, you can get a quarterback for a misplaced throw here and there. Like, you can excuse that, but you don't want bad decisions. And we've seen players, even some great ones. Sometimes you see Patrick Mahomes, we see Matthew Stafford do it. See some of the great ones where they make a throw. You're like, what in the world are you doing?
Yeah,
Have any of Kyler's 5 picks been that for you?
The funny thing is, outside of probably the Michael Wilson one, which he explained away, and I still don't know if I agree with his explanation, but he explained away. I don't think anything was like bad. I think, you look at this game in particular, the 2 throws, the first one, he got baited pretty badly.
Ernest Jones made a heck of a play, because everything about that play, like the analyst there, Lorenzo Alexander, after the game, even Jonathan Gannon immediately after game was saying the ball should have gone there, and that was a great play by Jones. The leverage said, that play is going to be open. Jones had his back to the receiver, but apparently did that to then make a play on the ball. And in fairness, we've seen the Seattle defenders do some really good things. Devin Witherspoon did it against the Cardinals on that fourth. Like, he was sold on that 4th and 1 play and recovered very quickly to basically blow up the play. And so, yeah, I didn't think that was a bad throw or a bad decision. Even the second interception, like when he threw the ball, there is no reason to think that Kobe Bryant was going to be able to make that. Now, in retrospect, when a player's that open, that far down the field, you would hope your quarterback, especially when you're not trying to throw the ball over any defender, that you would zip it in. And Gannon said that on Monday, is that on the Kobe Bryant pick, that he should have flattened the throw. And if he puts more zip on it, flattens the throw, Bryant doesn't have a chance to get it. And on top of that's going to be a big play to Zay Jones. The pick by Byron Murphy, which is the throw on the sideline to Michael Wilson. Kyler said, and my son Diego told me, he was trying to throw that away, and I was like, maybe. And then Kyler said he was trying to throw it after this, and it was a tricky situation there because in that particular one, he was still in the pocket. He had pressure in his face, and so there was a moment when Wilson was open. And so I get what he's saying, because if you just make a blatant throwaway from behind the pocket, you're going to get flagged for intentional grounding. He just didn't get enough of it. And so
that was the one.
That's the one you're like, that's probably a bad one.
Yeah, that was the one I thought was pretty bad. We talked last week about the one, he again, I think the Michael Wilson one was still bad. I understand his explanation. I just don't agree with him. So I think it was a bad one. But the Kobe Bryant one I thought was probably the worst one so far. But this is what I've said. And I know people that don't like Kyler are not going to want to hear this, which is fine, but it's just the reality of it. So this is what the issue becomes. And I was talking to my buddy about this, buddy of ours, but I was talking to my buddy about this, and it, it's hard for people to understand this, but when you look at this situation or the outcome of a lot of situations in games and whatnot, the reality is that they are in games because of him. They win games because of him. And unfortunately, they lose games because of him. And his variance is what is the problem more than anything. Because when he's on, he's playing at a high level, whether it was, LA or Miami or New York or, those games, when he's playing at that high level, he's, one of the best in the game. The problem itself becomes that if he's not playing at that high level, they don't consistently have enough outside of that to win.
And they can't overcome mistakes. Like when he is, because the problem is that everything is the problem right now. How many times can you expect Kyler to overcome a holding penalty? Like even-ish, like going on that second interception, the one by Kobe Bryant on Sunday. Guess what? If he makes that throw correctly, guess what? It doesn't count anyway because they got flagged for holding on the play. They had a touchdown taken off the board because of a holding penalty. They have been bad when it comes to penalties, the technique wise, and they know that the thing is that they know tendencies. That's one of the things that NFL teams do. In the Cardinals, and Jonathan Gannon's mentioned a few times, is that they talk about the way officiating crews call games, and we'll talk about it in the next segment. But Paris Johnson, not a good stretch for him.
No, but Jess, think about this: could the Cardinals win a game if he throws 5 interceptions?
Probably not.
right? I mean, if
They get blown
and
out
even
in that case because like
right,
they get killed.
and the Texans won, or sorry, the Lions beat the Texans, on Sunday
When
Night
Jared Goff
Football.
threw 5 interceptions, that's
Yeah.
absurd.
Can the Cardinals win a game when Kyler completes less than 60% of his passes for 150 yards and 2 interceptions?
That's
Like,
hard.
and by the way, can they win by 10? Because that's the thing is, the Chiefs beat the 49ers 28-18 when Patrick Mahomes put up those numbers. Like that's the thing. And we were talking about the we're talking about like the Bengals, right? And people will be like, oh, Joe Burrow, he needs this, he needs that. It's like, and I agree to an extent, like he's not gotten a lot of help, but like look at some of the games that they've lost this year and how well Burrow's played. And it's just one of those situations where sometimes the quarterback is good enough and everybody around you is not. And then sometimes the quarterback isn't good enough and everything around you is. And the Cardinals are an unfortunate situation where if the quarterback's not good enough, they don't typically have enough to win games. And we talked about
to be close.
Right. And we talked about the Geno stuff, right? Like think about last week in their win over the Jets, week 13, their win over the Jets, right? Geno is okay, right? Geno's okay. And they win, they come back and win. We talked about the win where which one was it? I can't remember. It's just interesting to kind of look at it and follow those things. I mean, we talked about like Sam Darnold the week before, right? Like if Kyler played at that level in a lot of games, they're not able to win. And that's what the hard thing becomes, is that you have to have a guy that if he's not on his A or B game, like even if he gives you a C game, and this one was a D game, so I don't want anybody to think I'm saying like this was a B game, but like even if he gives you a C game, you have no shot. Like you don't have any chance, and that's really tough to overcome. And that's the thing is like you look at teams and you look at quarterbacks and you look at situations and you see, obviously, unfortunately, the hit that Trevor Lawrence took. Now, it's going to loom large on a lot of things. But I mean, we're talking about a team that just paid Trevor Lawrence an astronomical amount of money to have a guy that has won 2 games this year. Like his most wins in a season's, 9. He's led the league in interceptions. His most touchdown passes in seasons 25. Like all of those things that we look at and scoff or get on Kyler about. I mean, this is a guy like Trevor Lawrence. I don't even think they've made the playoffs while they've had him, right? And so you have that, and how much of that is Lawrence? I mean, is it like before this season, especially before the hit? If you asked the average fan, would you take Kyler Murray or Trevor Lawrence? I would say it would probably be 60-40 Lawrence, if not maybe a little more.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing things like, I mean, I saw today, it's like, well, why don't you go get Sam Darnold?
What?
It's like, okay, so like you're going to take a chance on a guy that's had one outlier season in his career. Like, and this season is, slightly better than Kyler's. Think about this. He was at 23 touchdowns and 10 interceptions before he threw for 5 touchdowns last game. Like that. And by the way, great game. Like, can't take anything away from him. Great game. But that's, it's wild to see that. That's the reaction, right? Like even San Francisco and quarterback whisperer, Kyle Shanahan was like, I can't make that work. Right. Like, so it's wild to see that type of stuff and see what is happening. And just the way that fans react, because that's the thing is, the first thing is realistically, they can't move on from him after this year. He's the quarterback for 25. The other thing is, and most people aren't, as in depth as we are into the draft and things of that nature. There's not a guy worth drafting that's going to be better than him, right? Like, you're spinning your wheels. So you have that. If you want to go the Darnold, Dobbs, Kirk Cousins, those are the guys you're going to be able to get in the off season. That's up to you. You go for that. I don't know. Daniel Jones, is that where you want to go? Like, those are the guys that are going to be out there and be available. So
that would be something. Remember the number of people trying to say Daniel Jones was better than Kyler, and everyone here in Arizona, like, y'all are crazy. And then those same people. Well, and here's the thing with, like, one of the things is, like, we know he's not it. No, it's the truth is we have seen his ceiling. When he's playing as good as he can play, he's playing as good as any quarterback in the NFL. It's just that the Cardinals, to sustain any success at all, he has to consistently play at that level. You know how, in terms of it, I'm not going to say because he had a fantastic, he's one of my favorite players of all time. He's getting Tony Romo'd. They built those teams. Those Dallas teams were built to have a player, like have a quarterback like Peyton Manning. They needed a Peyton Manning to do that. And Romo had that sort of ceiling. He could dominate, but he has some historically memorable blunders and some bad games. But Tony Romo's still one of the best quarterbacks that the Cowboys have had, and one of the best I would have, like, I joked, I would have given the left nut for the Cardinals to get Tony Romo back when they were in their quarterback, 2010, 20, like, please, Tony. It's kind of the same situation here, is that the way that they construct these teams, and they've tried to make it so he doesn't have to do as much. And they have, and they're coaching him that way as well. So Kyler is doing what he's coached to do. He really is. He's managing that team really well. He's quarterbacking very well. But like those Tony Romo led teams, if Kyler Murray is not elite Kyler Murray, they do struggle to win games unless they're getting an absurd performance from their run game.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, right? So they've got to improve that. And let's be honest, and we're going to talk about this shortly. While his play has not been good enough, especially this last game, the offensive line's play since the break has been close to abysmal. And that is really beginning to stand out, and you're kind of seeing how that creates the issues for him as well. And so that's the thing, is like, I think they'll get right this week. They'll probably finish up right around 8 or 9 wins, which is where we all have them, right? It's how they got there and the process that's becoming the issue. And so we'll have to see how that plays out. But this year, it hasn't been as fun as we had hoped, right?
Yeah.
And so now it's like, all right, let's see how this goes the next 2 weeks, because if he just, if he craps the bed again against really bad teams, it's going to be really difficult to make this all, work out. But at the same time, we also know that there's really not anything or anywhere for them to go.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's look to the rest of the offense and on defense. What was there going on in that game against the Seahawks? That's coming up next on Rise of Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. In that loss, that 30-18 loss, there was a lot to not like. And so let's talk about not just Kyler, but the rest of it. And I think that you alluded to it just recently, the play of the offensive line. Now, I will say this. Guess what? Jonah Williams is good. Jonah Williams, his return has been good. But that has also coincided with the worst stretch of play that we've seen from Paris Johnson Jr. in his NFL career. He was playing it so well this season, and the penalties have mounted over the last couple of games. You can nitpick it to say, whether they should be penalties, but he's been flagged, I believe, 7 times now. The Cardinals are not built to be able to handle holding penalties. They are so hard to overcome. What can you make about what's happened to PJ? What's happened to Paris in the last 3 weeks?
I think a lot of it is just that he is. Guys are figuring things out. That's one of the things. I think an reported is probably the wrong word, right? Discussed situation this last game was the not having Tristan Colon in, because boy, oh boy, is Isaiah Adams not ready to play yet.
He played the entire game. The entire game.
Yeah, he was bad. And that's unfortunate, but I think you and I kind of warned everybody about that. Evan Brown probably had his worst game of the season as well. I mean, so
regarding that, I wonder if that was because Cologne in week 12 was so bad against Leonard Williams.
Yeah.
And I at least in this game, Williams wasn't he wasn't actively wrecking things the way he had the last 2 weeks. And so maybe Adams was simply a slightly better matchup on the line for Williams than Cologne, even though Cologne has much more experience.
Yeah, and so you just kind of look at it, and it's one of those situations where it is what it is, and this line was really bad this week. I mean, it just was, like you mentioned, Jonah Williams probably, the brightest spot of the bunch. He had a fairly decent game. Yelda's kind of been that steady, unspectacular type of thing. This was one of his worst games, and this 3-game stretch has been by far his worst 3-game stretch in the season, which was ironic because he was coming off a 3-game stretch like the rest of the team where he was playing at such a high level.
Never let the Cardinals have a bye week ever. I think that's no bye weeks for the Cardinals ever, please.
And it's just unfortunate because you look at how well they were playing and to now how poorly they are playing as a group, and you see the change in everything, and you also see the fact that this team just they just don't have that next guy, right? And so when one guy is struggling, it just doesn't seem like anybody can get them to be consistent, and that's where The problem is, and we'll see how this kind of turns around. And the next 2 weeks we'll discuss. They should be potential get right games, but at the same time, it's unfortunate that it got to this point because they had a chance on their own. They had a chance on their own to get to a point where this wasn't, or this wouldn't have been an issue, or one bad game here or there. But to put 3 in a row together, right? It makes it really difficult because now, you mentioned it. You start to look at it. This is the worst stretch of the season. And then it's wild how little we've talked about it. And I think it's because obviously the offense has played so poorly. But this was probably the worst defensive effort we've seen from the Cardinals since the Packers game.
Absolutely, because the run game, they had no answer for the run game. Zach Charbonnet played really well. We both like Charbonnet coming out of college, out of UCLA, but he'd really kind of been just kind of But the Cardinals, their rush defense, the Cardinals had only allowed one team in the previous 4 games to reach 100 yards rushing, and Charbonnet was something else. They didn't get much. They didn't stop that. They had no pass rush. Like they'd had 11 sacks in the previous 2 games, or 9 sacks the previous 2 games. And granted, it wasn't like from a dominant performance from anyone, but they weren't getting pressure on Smith at all. And I saw it again on the Zebra Technologies thing, the email that we get from about Next Gen Stats. For the second time in 3 weeks, Geno Smith against the Cardinals had the lowest percentage of quote unquote aggressive throws, because all he had to do was just throw dink and dunk and throw to wide open guys. So he didn't have to press the issue at all to move the ball down the field.
Yeah, and it was too easy for them offensively, like you said, and you mentioned it. One of the worst pass rushing performances of the season, probably the worst coverage work we've seen all season. I mean, it was bad this week. And that's the interesting thing is that it was really just a cornucopia of bad. And this was, again, this was the worst game that they've played as a team since the Packers game.
Yeah.
And so to have that regression on both sides of the ball back to that, I mean, maybe that means they're going to go on a 3-game win streak here, right? And
they're going to they need a 4-game winning streak.
Really. Well, yeah.
They almost basically.
Oh yeah. Maybe they go on another 4-game winning streak, right? They finish up
that'd be 10,
fun. 10-7, but it's just one of those scenarios where
they're now back to the situation. Like I think you said in the text is like, they're no longer the plucky team fighting with, nothing to prove, with no pressure on them. The second they had pressure on them, when they were playing from a position of power, like, they're in the top of the division, they fall apart, which is really disappointing to see, because that's not the progress we wanted to see from this team, especially coached by Jonathan Gannon. He'd been doing great with this team, and so he's great for coaching them up and staying motivated. But now when they're in a position where they're in control of their destiny, things are falling apart.
Yeah, and it makes it tough, right, just to watch it. And because I think if you didn't have the expectations and you just watched it, you'd be like, yeah, whatever. But it's the expectations on top of it that you're like, oh, they're on their way. And we knew this would be a tough 3-game stretch, but we didn't expect 0-3 and 3 games where they just didn't look like 2 of the games they didn't look like they belong on the field with the other team.
Yeah, it's yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of Secret podcast, Mr. Cardinals talking a little bit. Let's move on and talk about, well, where are the Cardinals now? They're in a kind of bad situation. So let's discuss their fading chances for the postseason in the NFC West. That's coming up next on the Rise of Red. We're back on the Rise of Secret podcast. Mr. Cardinals talking. The Cardinals now fall under 500, down to 6-7. They are now in third place in the NFC West, and it dropped a spot in the NFC playoff standings, and now find themselves very, very handicapped in the playoff race, because now there are 4 teams that they're battling for postseason position that own head-to-head tiebreakers on them. That, if we've talked about this before, because Washington and Green Bay are wild card teams, and they own head-to-head tiebreakers for the Cardinals. Now Minnesota does as well, and with now this 2-0 season sweep, the Seahawks own a head-to-head tiebreaker over the Cardinals, which makes winning the NFC West incredibly difficult. It means over the last 4 games, Seattle can win a maximum of 1 game, and the Cardinals must win all 4 of theirs. Now, is that absolutely possible with the schedule that they have? Whichever one has 100%, but now the Rams are now 7-6 and are also more or less in control of their fate, because if they keep pace with the Seahawks until week 18 and then beat the Seahawks in week 18, the Rams would leapfrog the Seahawks at the end of the year. So things just got super interesting in the NFC West. But like the Cardinals, depending on the analytics you look at, I think it was NBC's analytics said it was, I think, 4% that they had of winning the NFC West or making the playoffs. Pro Football Network has it somewhere around 22%. But no matter who's looking at it, the Cardinals had a massive swing. I believe that it came from PFF or somewhere else last week that said, it was from Aaron Schatz from the Fantasy Network. And the biggest swing in terms of playoff possibilities, had the Cardinals won that game, they would have had a 71% chance of making the postseason. A loss drops all the way to 11%, and that's where they're at. The Seahawks would have been, with the win, are now up at 60-something%, and had they not won, they would have been at 20-something%, I believe. But the Cardinals have really handcuffed themselves, basically making the rest of the season all must wins. I ran some playoff scenarios. I took the NFL playoff machine over at on ESPN, and now if you look at if we look at the final 4 games, the Cardinals could definitely win all 4 games. And if you look at the next 4 weeks for the Seahawks, they've got Green Bay. Now, granted, that's a home game against Green Bay, not the super winnable game. That'll be tough. They are at home against the Vikings, another very tough matchup. So they've got Green Bay, they've got Minnesota. They do have the Bears in week 17 on the road, and then they are on the road against the Rams in week 18. Okay. Could you see a scenario where they win only 1 out of their final 4 games? 100%. I predict that will be how it goes, right?
Yeah, you can definitely see that, and that's the one thing you look at and you say, hey, that's, it gives them a shot. But we had talked about it, right? Like, this was the idea was that the Cardinals didn't need every other team to play as well as they have, and it is a bit of a cluster when you just kind of punch all the numbers in and everybody plays each other again at least once, and so you're like, okay, well, we need the 49ers to beat the Rams, but we need the Rams to beat the Seahawks. Okay. And all of that. And so
basically the Cardinals, breaking it down, the only way the Cardinals can win the division is they win out, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, there's other scenarios, but that's taking into account that every other team only wins one game, and
right, because if the Seahawks, Rams, and Cardinals all finish 9-8, even though LA holds, like, even though the Cardinals would hold a head-to-head over Los Angeles, and Los Angeles holds the head-to-head over Seattle, the Rams win the division if the Cardinals and Seahawks and Rams all finish 9-8. The Rams win the division. Essentially. Well, and that was playing out some predictions. The Rams play the 49ers this week. They play the Jets on the road in week 16. They play the Cardinals at home in week 17. The Cardinals have to win that game. And then they play Seattle in week 18, and LA has to win that game. But yeah, it's essentially the Cardinals have to win out, and they need Seattle to win no more than one game. And because if the Cardinals go 4-0, the Rams go 3-1 because they play the Cardinals. And then Seattle only wins one more game. The Cardinals would own the tiebreaker over the Rams because they will have beaten them twice. So, but basically 10 wins is the key. 10 wins is the key. The Cardinals need all 10 wins. They need to beat every team left on their schedule to have a shot, basically.
Well, and again, yes, how do we get there? That's exactly it. But the reality is this, Jess. Sunday is the make or break game of this season. And the reason
if they can't beat the Patriots.
Yeah, the reason it's a make or break game is because if they're so bad that they can't beat a New England Patriots team that's currently 3-10, and we'll break this game down, but 31st in scoring offense in the NFL. Their last three games they've lost to the Rams, the Dolphins, and the Colts. They're on a bye week. After they play the Cardinals, they go to the Bills. You're like, if you can't beat that team, then just don't come back. Like, let's just fast forward for the rest.
We're almost. Well, then we can start. Then it's officially, hey, where are they in the NFL draft?
Right, and that's the thing is, like, it's crazy to say this, but you look at it. The next two teams they play have the same amount of wins as the Cardinals this season, and we haven't been able to say that for a long time, right? Like,
yeah.
And so for the Cardinals to be at 6-7, and just have a realistically, they should be 8-7 after this 2-game stretch.
Which, by the way, was exactly what we predicted. We thought they would be 8-7 going into the final 2 games of the season.
Then they're on schedule, they're on pace. We're just very disappointed with the back end of the season, and that's those final 7 games being, whether it ends up being 2-5 or 3-4 or hell, even 4-3, we would be extremely disappointed because you had a chance, right? And we'll look back, and the biggest what if of the season will be the Minnesota game. I mean, that'll be the game that everybody points to as like, oh, if this game goes different, who knows what happens next week, the next week against Seattle. And then if you finish 10-7 and miss the playoffs, you're going to go, that Minnesota game is the reason why you missed the playoffs. Like, that's the only thing that you'll think about. So, it's frustrating because, like we said, the regression as a team back to this point was just so unexpected. And for that game to be the worst game that they've played since Green Bay, for it to be the worst defensive performance after, we've gassed them up for the last several weeks, the worst defensive performance since the Green Bay game, for all of it to happen in the game it happened, where basically the season was on the line, is, I think, what is the hardest part for everybody. Because again, if they were, if they finish 9-8, and we go back and listen to what we talked about at the beginning of the season, we're going to go, okay, they did everything we asked. They just, they had that little struggle in the middle. But the reality is, it's how they got here, and that's what's going to make this difficult. And even if they do finish 9-8, even if they win the next 2 games and they're back over 500 again, and we're having this conversation about, well, if they just win this week, they'll take the lead in the division, right? Even if we get to that point, it's still going to be, okay, well, now show me that you can actually do it again, right? Like, it won't be, oh, we know it's going to happen, or we think it can happen, or it's going to be like, I don't believe you. Like, prove it to me. And that's the frustrating thing, because we thought after the 4-game win streak, we're like, oh, this is the new Arizona Cardinals. They had those 2 close games that they went down and won with kicks. What? Tyler game-winning drives. What? And then they just beat the tar out of 2 bad teams. And you're like, okay, all right, they're right there. They're right there. And now you're like, oh, this team sucks. Like, you're like, they're awful. And that's the hard part. And what's ironic, and I'll leave you with this, Jess. What's ironic? Think about this, Jess. They beat the Dolphins with Tua back, right? 28-27. The Dolphins lose the next week with Tua back, 30-27, to get to 2-6. The Dolphins and the Cardinals have the exact same record right now, and one team is looking at it going, we're getting hot at the right time, getting ready to head to the playoffs, and the other team's like, their fan base is in a complete spiral, right? Like, it's not it's not a matter of like the 6 and 7. That's not what matters. It's that they're 6 and 7 right now after having been 6 and 4.
Right. It's geez. And then it starts this week. The Cardinals officially right now are on life support. We're not ready to, but if either the Cardinals lose to the Patriots or Seattle beats Green Bay, I think next week we will be declaring this Cardinal season dead.
Yeah.
Go Packers. Go right. Packers, right?
Well, let's just hope it's not next week, because that would be devastating a little bit.
Yeah, let's honestly, for just goodness sakes, let us keep things interesting in the division so everything's decided in week 18. That's how the script needs to be, right?
Right.
So let's bring it down to week 18. The Cardinals win the next 3 games. Then they have to win. They have to beat the 49ers, and then the Rams have to beat the Seahawks, and then we make the playoffs, right? Because if Arizona wins and the Seahawks win, then Seattle goes to the playoffs. And I just ran a couple, I just did for a thing. You know what? It might. Every wild card team in both conferences might have at the end of the season at least 11 wins.
Correct.
And then you've got the Cardinals getting in at 10-7 and Houston getting it at 9-8. Absurd. All right. With that, let us wrap up this edition of the Rise of Sierra podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web. We've got 2 shows coming up the rest of the week. I will be recording with Patriots Wire's Jordy McElroy, and then Seth and I will be back later in the week to record and preview the Patriots game, and hopefully everything gets right this weekend, Seth. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, rise up, Sea Red.